On today's First Five, I want to talk about, we touched on the story yesterday, but it really matters. This has to do with the staffer on the Bernie Sanders presidential campaign being caught in a Project Veritas recording. The Project Veritas people who do undercover recording of all sorts of people recorded one of the staffers for the Bernie Sanders campaign working in Iowa. We played some segments of it yesterday. I want to ask Matt, the very wonderful producer. I sent him two clips I want to play. I want to start with the first one I sent you, Matt. And this is just, again, this staffer. I want you to hear what he is saying about Bernie Sanders.
What do I think?
And you're honest.
I think that he's a legit socialist masquerading as a democratic socialist. I think that a lot of the things that he's suggesting and moving forward takes us further than democratic socialism.
Like
but
what?
He masquerades it.
Okay, folks. Again, that was a Project Veritas clip, a short one. This is the same guy we heard talking yesterday. This is a Bernie Sanders campaign staffer in Iowa. And yesterday you heard him talking about the importance of embracing the idea of gulags, like the Soviet gulags that Solzhenitsyn wrote about in Gulag Archipelago, in that famous book, that famous true book. This guy, a Bernie staffer, is saying that America needs to have gulags to send billionaires and other people who are not on board with the revolution. And you need to understand what this guy is saying. He is not saying we're going to have friendly Democrat socialism, kind of like in Finland, where we have a little bit more expanded social welfare, or maybe we have more of healthcare paid for by the government. He's a radical revolutionary, as he defined himself, an anarchic communist. He is up for this. And this guy is a Bernie staffer. But what you just heard him say is he, having been around Bernie Sanders, actually believes Bernie Sanders is the real deal, is actually also himself much further left than just a Democrat socialist. This is what I've been talking about in the show. It's important to understand. When someone says they're a Democrat socialist, they're trying to soften the idea of socialism to mean, well, as long as we all agree. And so it's democratic. You don't like it, you can change it. And understanding when people say that, they're saying, I embrace socialism, which is kissing cousins with communism, and I mean to be a revolutionary, and I mean to change this country, and I will do it. This is who Bernie Sanders really is. This staffer has spilled the beans on who Bernie Sanders really is. I want to play another clip, same staffer from Project Veritas talking about his views, Bernie Sanders' views, what they really want to do to America. This is also, again, clip 2, Bernie Sanders campaign worker.
So that was the intention of gulags, right? It's like not only to remove the people that were insidious to the state from the state, like, hey, you guys are all causing problems, you're working against the revolution. We're just going to remove you and put you in Siberia, where you learn the value of being a comrade. And that's that's what it has to be. Our prisons in the United States right now are far worse than anything that they experienced in Gulag.
You're not gonna get Bernie to say gulags, but I'm all aboard for gulags. I feel as though there needs to be re-education for a significant portion of our society.
I think he is too.
I mean, but you can't, running for president in the United States, you can't say anything like that, right?
But if people are going to try to fight back against the revolution, when you hear about atrocities committed by in Cuba, Fidel and Che, killing people, those people that were actively they were anti-revolution, they were fighting against the revolution. In any war, if you when you guys were in war and you encountered people that were fighting against you, what did you do to those people? Right? I mean, the same thing holds true in revolution, right? You can't abide people actively working against your revolution. You can give them a choice. Be like, hey, you can join the revolution. You can not be a bootlicker. You can sit idly by and allow it to happen. But if you're gonna take up arms against the revolution, then you should expect a violent response, right? It's natural.
Folks, I want to make a couple points that really matter in today's first five about this clip. Number one, you heard this guy say in the other clip that Bernie Sanders is right with him, that Bernie Sanders is at least a radical leftist socialist. He's not a Democrat, socialist, friendly kind of guy, kind of like Denmark, which is how Bernie Sanders always tries to soften his socialist message, is to say he doesn't mean like Cuba or Venezuela, where the government's violent against people. It just means, choices being made by elections. Understand, this guy you're hearing speak, Kyle Jurek, working for the Sanders campaign in Iowa, is completely good with characterizing not only himself, but others on the campaign. I couldn't play the whole clip because it's too long. Talked about other people from Antifa, part of the campaign. He thinks they're fine. He's saying Bernie Sanders is with them, with that thinking, but you can't just say that as a presidential candidate, because then you might not win. Number two, this guy is not joking about the idea of gulags. Now you might think, Debbie, stop fretting. We're not going to have gulags in America. So what if he has this, pie in the sky idea? So we may not have gulag camps in America like we had in Siberia, but we will have the mindset from the federal government that disagreement with the radical revolutionary ideas of the American left will not be tolerated. You will have that emanating from Washington. If you have a president like Bernie, we're not going to put up with people who will not agree with a radical leftist socialist idea. This is what this guy is saying. In addition, understand what the campaign said. Now, I have to tell you, folks, I think of any other candidate running, even the Democrat side, had a person on their team make these statements. Now, obviously, the kid was, didn't know he was being recorded. He's just talking away about what a cool revolutionary he is, but he's speaking as a member of the Bernie Sanders campaign in Iowa, advocating for gulags, and in the clip we played yesterday, sending off billionaires to make them pound rocks 12 hours a day until they understand there's nothing special about them, they're just a comrade. If any other campaign in this presidential year in 2020 had a staffer say things like that, that person would have been fired, relieved from their responsibilities, roundly denounced by the candidate almost instantaneously. You would have had even the great Senator Warren would not have permitted, even though I think she thinks along those lines, she would not have permitted someone to stay in her campaign who talked that way. But the statement from the Sanders camp, because of course the media reach out to them and say, what about this guy, Kyle Jurek? He's saying that you're a real socialist, that the revolution is coming, that we're going to have gulags, and he supports gulags. What do you have to say? And the Sanders campaign answer was, Iowans, the people living in Iowa, don't care about political gossip. They put out a statement, the people that we talk to in Iowa, they want to hear about health care for all, and health care is a right, and free education, and free college. They want to hear all these great things the campaign stands for. They, the Iowans, do not care about political gossip. Not a word, at least out of the person permitted to speak on behalf of the campaign, to the media to say, well, of course, Kyle Jurek is crazy. Of course, he's a radical leftist. Of course, he's dangerous. Not a word. But I want to just tell you my final point in this first slide about this kid, young man. I heard from actually quite a few listeners yesterday saying essentially, why are you spending so much time talking about Bernie Sanders? Number one, that the Democrats are not going to let him win the nomination. He won't win. And number two, even if he wins the nomination, he won't win the presidency. So what? Stop focusing on Bernie Sanders. I will tell you, folks, the reason I want to focus on him and keep this kind of Project Veritas video and the refusal of the Bernie Sanders campaign to denounce it in any way, I want to keep it front and center in your thinking, is this. That young man chose to go work for the Bernie Sanders campaign because this is exactly how he thinks. And as he says in other portions of the entire clip, by the way, you can hear the entire clip at our website, americacanwetalk.org, on the homepage, under shows, drop down list of links, click on and listen to the whole thing that this young man says. But the reason I want to keep this front and center in your thinking is this young man came to these ideas about hatred of America, hatred of successful people in America, hatred of business, embrace of the radical, and I'm going to use the word that what this man is, he's a radical communist revolutionary. He came to those ideas because for decades he's been listening to people like Bernie Sanders. It is not inconsequential that someone like Bernie Sanders, largely irrelevant in the United States Senate for decades, is all of a sudden the top contender in the first primary voting stage for the presidential election in 2020. Bernie Sanders has been hammering away at the beauty of communism, the greatness of socialism, the rightness of socialism, the evil of America, the evil of capitalism, the evil of freedom, the evil of free markets, the evil of corporations and businesses that employ Americans. He's been hammering away at that message for decades, as have many others. His words, his teaching, they have had consequences. This young man did not wake up one day and say, wow, I think I'll be a radical communist revolutionary. He's listened to people like Bernie Sanders and other leftists funded in large part by organizations like George Soros' Open Society and other radical leftists. He's listened to the leftists in the universities in this country that perpetually condemn America, freedom, free markets, capitalism, the goodness of an abundant freedom in America. He's listened to America be denounced, ridiculed, and mocked by leftists in this country for decades. And there are millions and millions more like him. It's why it matters to talk about this. It matters to understand this young guy thinks this is the way to think. He's a very self-righteous. I'm on top of everything. I know what's what. I know everything. I am superior. Everyone who will not agree with the radical revolution must be sent to a gulag to get their head straight. There are millions like him. And actually one of the other notes I got from some listeners said, so Bernie Sanders gets his message out there, and he loses. So then what? And here's my answer to so then what? Americans, especially Democrat voters, need to be hounding and pounding on their elected officials, Democrats in the U.S. House and the U.S. Senate, demanding that those Democrats renounce and denounce socialism and communism and tyranny, that they reassert their love of the ideas of the founding of America, the personal individual freedom of the individual, the idea that free markets are the only economic system possibly available that can honor the right of the individual to live in liberty. Democrats need to feel pressure from the American people to denounce people like AOC, like Bernie Sanders, because we talked with a guest a couple of days ago, David McIntosh, about this. You don't hear one Democrat in the leadership position, in any leadership position in this country, denouncing Bernie Sanders, denouncing AOC, denouncing socialism, claiming that for America, socialism cannot live here. You don't hear anyone on the left, on the Democrat side of the aisle, say a word. They let him ramble. They give legitimacy to him by allowing him to spout off about how much he loves Russia and loves communism and loves socialism and wants to inflict it in America. And there is barely a voice on the American left denouncing him. Democrats who claim that the Democrat Party isn't really socialist. Oh, no, we're not. We're just Democrats. We're just, really in the American ball field Democrats. If they can't denounce Bernie Sanders, they are complicit in his revolutionary mindset that you heard expressed in that young man's words. Folks, this is not a time to be weak. It's not a time to be concerned about maybe we're being too critical. What do we know? Maybe after all, Bernie Sanders doesn't really mean it. It's not a time to make excuses for him. It's not a time making excuses for the Democrats for failing to denounce him. Even if he is the winner of all of the primaries, even if he wins the nomination, his policies are dangerous, repressive policies that will take away the liberty America was founded on, and every member of the Democrat Party ought to be saying so. Certainly, members of the GOP and just patriotic America-loving people need to be calling out his ideas, and the idea that he'd keep a staffer on his team who talks like that as profoundly, robustly anti-American. And that, my friends, is today's First Five.